Alright guys, this is going to be a standalone episode on how to modify the dashboard on your classic vehicle. This is commonly done if you are doing body swaps or if you are upgrading your gauges to something like the Dakota Digital Universal set. If you want to follow along with the rest of this project, I am doing a full body swap. This is my ice cream truck build, but I wanted to do a standalone because I know a lot of you guys are facing a similar dilemma with your projects. Now the first thing you have to do is decide what size opening we are going with. We are starting off with a F350 from 1958 that has a very large gauge cluster. We are swapping it out to a 2009 Chevy Express that has a pretty common sized one for newer vehicles. Now because this is a body swap, our steering wheel ends up pretty far over here to the left, so that is exactly where we are going to put this cluster. So we are going to scoot it over as far to the left as we can, and then we need to cut out about 6.5 inches from this center section and move this portion over. Now the problem is, once we cut this section and move it over, we are going to have a large gap right here. Once we have that gap, we are then going to have to take a piece of steel, bend it with a similar curve, and then put a nice little crease in it, and then follow that same curve again in order to fill this section in. Now I do have a section cut out from the bottom right here. This is for my steering column and my shifter. We're not really focusing on that. This is just going to be what we have to do to get this gauge cluster area looking good. So first things first, let's get a little bit more measuring done to figure out what we need to cut, what we need to save, and then I'll get some tape up there to mark it so I can get it cut. Alright guys, we've got everything clamped up just about where it needs to be. Luckily there was a beautiful curve right here in our dashboard, so I was able to take a piece of 1/2-inch square tubing, clamp it together, get it perfect. Over here I used some welding clamps. I picked these up from Harbor Freight. They are super useful. One thing to keep in mind, as you tack weld around it, the steel will actually shrink and it will bite into this piece of steel, making them very difficult to remove. So make sure you keep those tack welds far away as we get started. So we will tack, pull these clips off, and then we'll start to slowly tack down here. You see there is a big gap. That is because when this piece was over here, it had more of a curve to it. So as I tack weld down here, I'll start to slowly pull those together. Now we may end up with a slight down curve right here. We will address that when we build our little piece for right here. Now in order to get this bend figured out, while this piece was off, I went over to my bender and then I took a piece of scrap steel to get a nice little bend in it so that I would have something to use as a mock-up for this piece in the future. So next step, let's get this thing tacked up. All right, everything looks great with our little gauge opening here. The next step is going to be filling this in, and I will do that by getting a piece of steel that is about an inch larger than the dimensions so that I can mount it from the underside and have it overlap by about a half an inch or so, and then extend a little bit farther so that I can fill in all of these holes because they will not be used in the final product. I get away with that because I am going to have to use a small amount of body filler to smooth everything out, so the fact that it sits inside just that little fraction of an inch isn't going to be a big deal. So let's go find some steel and get it cut and bent. All right, guys, here's how we are looking at the moment. I wanted to show you what it will look like with our gauges installed. This is just about the driver's perspective, so I think they look pretty good. Now, there will be a little bit of a gap on each side. Remember, this is not a show truck. This is a commercial vehicle that I'm building, so it doesn't need to look perfect. It just needs to function and look good. So the next step is going to be cutting right here all the way down and then cutting right here. And that is because the location of my steering wheel is possibly going to interfere with this, and it just doesn't make sense to spend too much time to try to make this all look perfect. So I will go ahead and cut a small square piece right here, and then I'll curve this edge to try and make that look a little bit cleaner. And then on this side, I will fill in these 4 holes. And then while I'm at it, I've got 4 holes right here that probably went to some type of a plate that is no longer in use. And then there's another hole up here, and I'm not sure where that went. So I'll go ahead and fill those in. That way we'll have a nice clean look. The process for doing this is basically the same as you've already seen. So let's just go ahead and fast forward to all of that being complete. All right, here's how it looks with the gauges installed. I mounted them with a little bracket right here and then right here that I made with my bender. And then on the underside here, I used some 1/2-inch square tubing for the top. And then here is what the sheet metal looks like from the inside. Now there are some little gaps you see right here and then right here. And then from the driver's seat, there's a small amount of the gauges that you can't quite see. So I may end up cutting out just a little bit right here and then curving it so that it matches the look of the gauges. If this were a show vehicle, I would absolutely use some sheet metal. I would fill that in. I'd follow that curve perfectly, curve it around, and then curve it back down and make this look all clean and factory. But again, this is a commercial truck, so you really have to pick and choose where you place your time and energy, because I have a long way to go on the rest of this build. All right, up next is the body filler. For this truck, I am using Evercoat's Lightweight Series filler. All right, so we've got our dashboard body filled, primered, and now wet sanded. We are ready for round 2 of the body filling. Let me show you the imperfections that we are trying to fix. All right, starting with the top of the dash right over here, came out absolutely fantastic. We are all ready to go. I do have some pinholes right here and then right here that I would usually just use a finishing putty to fill in, but we've got a little bit of a dip right here, so I will have to add just a little bit more material all the way down. A little bit further down, you can see right here, with this straight edge, we've got just a little bit of daylight. I didn't use quite enough putty there. And then this line right here. It's not quite perfectly straight. You see right in the middle, again, we need to use a little bit more body filler. I will probably end up using a larger putty knife right here to see if we can squeeze it into that little crack. And then when the time comes to sand it, I'll use this right here to get a nice straight edge up against it. And then same thing on the way down, get a nice little curve. So let's get to it. This here is a finishing glaze called Dolphin Glaze. It is made by U-Pole, and I'm using it to eliminate some of the surface imperfections and pinholes left over from the body filler. So here's how it looks all dry. I think it came out fantastic. The next step is going to be the top coat, but unfortunately for that, you will have to wait for the next episode when I paint the entire body. So stay tuned for that.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.